downstream the vessel goes to Menzoberranzan.
Menzoberranzan may sound like it's a medication, but it's actually a vast drow city-state known as the City of Spiders, and the birthplace of D&D's iconic e-boy, Drizzt Do'Urden. But while Menzoberranzan is not in fact a form of medication, you should still consult your doctor if after visiting you experience symptoms related to drow poison, underdark radiation, or even being captured and forced to work the mines. Menzoberranzan is the setting of the 1994 dungeon crawler by the same name, diving into the Underdark with Drizzt at our side to save a band of captured villagers. This one has been on my list to review for a while now, since it's kind of part of an unofficial trilogy of classic games that all use the same engine. The two Ravenloft games, we shall not mention the third because it does not exist and it cannot hurt me any longer, were both built using the exact same engine as Menzoberranzan, and thus they play very similarly to each other. And being that my reviews of Strahd's Possession and Stone Prophet were among the most popular videos I've ever made, it kind of feels like their long-forgotten Drizzt-worshipping little brother needs a review. Plus, I mean, come on, this is a 90s game about dark elves, so let's be entirely honest. When it comes to clickable thumbnail images, I figure Menzoberranzan is kind of a bit of a target-rich environment, so to speak. But all that aside, while I do feel that Menzoberranzan is the weakest of the three games made with the Strahd engine, I do feel like it's an incredibly telling snapshot into the dev cycle of Dreamforge and SSI at the time of release. This was the era of D&D video games, where the AD&D license was exclusively owned by SSI, who would occasionally shop it out to smaller devs. Menzoberranzan was in fact the last video game produced under this exclusive license. Very likely the failure of this game, with its quiet release and non-existence in the public memory, was the final straw that ended SSI's stranglehold over the industry, and began a new era in which TSR rented out the D&D license to many different developers, and led to such hits as Baldur's Gate later in the decade. But the weird thing is, despite flopping so hard that it ended an era of gaming, Menzoberranzan, it wasn't that bad. But before we go further, let me just take the opportunity to let you know that this video was brought to you by the patrons. Sign up now to get access to a ton of different perks, including some special privileges on a project that I will announce at the end of this video. Okay, back to it. Now, let's get started on character creation. I'm going in a little bit blind here in terms of what recruitable characters are going to be available, so I decided to play it safe and make a cleric and a mage. The other two games themed character creation around tarot cards. Menzoberranzan, however, flavors this process as the matron of House Do'Urden scrying on us to see exactly who is planning on invading their city.
One by one, reveal the sex, race, and class of these unwelcome visitors. In this way, we might best prepare.
The moment we get in engine, I'm struck with two distinct thoughts. The first is, if you don't like the color purple, this game may not be for you. The second was this strange and intoxicating feeling that I didn't expect. After spending so many hours loving the other two games built on this engine, I stepped into Menzo and had this strange nostalgia for a game I've never played. I felt so incredibly home immediately, and really, it felt good to be back. And fortunately for me, the quest was actually already done. My heroes saved the town before the game even started, and the game begins with everybody celebrating us. This is good. I love validation. Dudes get one party in their honor and remember it for the rest of their lives. This is mine, and no one can take this away from me. This is my night. It's been hard, okay? I just want a little recognition, that's all. No one can take this away from me. Fuck, the whole town's on fire. Apparently, while we were having a raucous party, drow snuck in and kidnapped everyone. Look, okay, let's be real. We've all had a few nights like that. Uni was a whole time. The bartender, at least, is still here, alive and uncaptured. And he tells us before we put out the fires that when we're done, we should return for a reward. Now I gotta extinguish all the fire and save the townsfolk so that they can finish complimenting me. And when I run into the town watch captain, holding the line in front of the armory, he puts an idea in my head. My day was stolen from me. Did Drizzt, that edgy white-haired fuck, do this? Did Drizzt take away my validation? Okay, there are probably a few people out of the loop on who Drizzt is. Drizzt is a drow, aka a dark elf, who was the star of a number of Dungeons & Dragons books by R.A. Salvatore starting in 1990. He was so immensely popular as a figure that he kind of became the face of D&D for a while. Let's explain his popularity like this. Running around the house wielding 2 cardboard tubes that you call scimitars and claiming that your house cat is your panther animal companion, that was sort of an early version of a Naruto run to a certain generation of D&D fans. Not me though. I wasted my adolescence on the Dragonlance novels, and I turned out fine. Has anyone seen my patient? He hasn't taken his Menzoberranzan in 3 days, and I'm beginning to grow concerned. Anyway, with this being the first video game to have Drizzt in it, I was a bit worried about how much restraint they were gonna have. Over the first few hours of the game, it seemed like Drizzt was all anyone could talk about. Drizzt this, Drizzt that, and here we are, just as side characters. I don't want to be a side character in a Drizzt story. That's kind of a deal breaker for me. Look, don't get me wrong. I am totally cool with there being a Drizzt game. Just, if it's a Drizzt game, let us play as Drizzt. But regardless, I figure time would tell if that was really what was going on here. At this point, I got a notification from my party reminding me to go get the reward from the innkeeper. And that's actually kind of weird, right? A modern game would do that, certainly, but old games kinda just let it be on you to remember to pick up things like quest rewards. That means that the game thinks this is very important. Whatever it was we were picking up was clearly going to be plot relevant. He gives us a shiny magic helmet. I call it Chekhov's helmet, for no reason. I just like funny words that don't mean anything. We also pick up the watch captain to serve as one of our frontline guys, cause he's a big old beefy dude. And the 3 of us are off to try and get ourselves into some kinda we just rescued the villagers from an evil city-state kinda situation. Now that we're running around the monster-filled plains outside of town, I start to get a good assessment of how the gameplay matches up to the Ravenloft games. And frankly, my initial assessment ended up being more or less unchanged the entire playthrough. Menzoberranzan kinda simplified all the fun away in the name of approachability. It's absolutely the easiest of the 3 games built with the Strahd engine, but it's not like the others were terribly difficult. The controls are a bit clumsy, and the initial spawn point in Strahd's possession was probably one of the biggest waves of get good that I've ever faced, but once you have the basics down and the starter area has been stabilized, there was only just enough difficulty to stop you from turning your brain off. Strahd's possession did it best in my opinion. There were enemies that would swarm and require AoE, enemies that would hit like freight trains and would require you to throw your entire arsenal at them, and enemies that dealt status effects so devastating that you needed to study the monster manual constantly to make sure you knew which enemies required extra precautions. Stone Prophet reduced this heavily, but not entirely. It actually came out after Menzoberranzan, so I suspect it benefited significantly from hindsight. Because when Menzo optimized out the difficulty, they didn't add in anything to replace it in order to keep things interesting. Everything is tank and spank, with barely any unique enemies to switch up combat. In terms of status effects, I got poisoned, I think, once the entire game, and that was it. Excepting a few enemies like drow sorceresses that lob fireballs at you, there really is no combat variety. You just run up to everything and you hit it till it dies. But again, credit where it's due. They fixed this problem and managed to get the combat better balanced in Stone Prophet. So at least they recognize the problem. For my money, I honestly still preferred Strahd's Possession, because it required you to always keep your brain turned on and use all the tools in your arsenal. As our blades harvest a bumper crop of bugbears and monsters, we stumble across an old wizard. He's kind enough to tell us that we're not gonna last long against Underdark radiation if we don't have protective spells. He can provide these for us actually, but he'll need a bunch of gems to cast the wards on. We head off once more, hoping to find a missing caravan that was rumored to be full of gemstones. Soon after, we also meet a a companion who is willing to help us on the plains. His help is limited though. The Underdark is no place for a centaur, and he refuses to go down there with us for any reason. His bow is pretty useful actually for picking off some of the giants in the area because we're still quite low level, but I try and get used to the idea that he's not going to be with us for long. Speaking of giants, although clearing them out hasn't been a huge problem so far, Drizzt arrives to save us from one. Drizzt, come on man, I just killed like 20 of these guys, we were fine. And at this point it's clear. The Drow raided town because Mistress Malice, Drizzt's mother, wanted to capture him to force him to pay for abandoning their house. Okay, Drizzt, you've been giving me serious DM NPC vibes this whole game. But I knew that the centaur was a temporary companion, and as a reviewer, if Drizzt is going to completely ruin this game with his hijinks, I need to know. So I bite the bullet and I invite him to the party.
He's level 15? What?
We find the missing gems in a Lucrata cave. Lucrata being one of many C-list D&D monsters who, nevertheless, are still being updated into the modern editions. I do appreciate how all the games in this series were unafraid to pull out the weird and the obscure monsters. Even if the gameplay variety was lacking in this game, I was always looking forward to the otherworldly artwork we would get from each and every new monster we stumbled across. In the cave, we also come across a new addition to the series, jumping and flying. There are spells and potions that can let you access high up ledges, and you'll need to be careful about holding on to them until your wizard is high enough level to cast them on their own. There was a single jump section that was added in Stone Prophet, and I was a little incredulous as to why they added a jump system for only one puzzle. Now I know why. It's because jumping and flying had already been added and was a much bigger deal in Menzoberranzan. This is honestly kind of a strength of all three of these games, and it may even be the strongest in this entry. Each game has unique local spells that are only really useful in the local environment, and those spells still may or may not appear in other titles, but they won't really help you. Strahd's Possession had negative plane protection to keep the players safe from the draining attacks of the undead. Stone Prophet had spells to help you deal with the thirst of the desert. And Menzoberranzan has spells that let you access high crags and pass through spider webs. It's really quite cool, and it left me excited to see what they would add to each new title of the series. At the back of this cave, we find the gems. Returning them to the old man gives us the last thing we need: protection from Underdark radiation. And we're ready to enter the dwarven mines that serve as the nearest entrance to Menzoberranzan. Finally, we can get the villagers back, and I can receive their praise. These dudes will be liking the video and subscribing to the channel in no time. It was a weirdly lame call to action. 1 second. Doc, are there side effects to all this Menzoberranzan you gave me? Yes, you become extremely unsubtle about asking people to subscribe. Also, your genitals turn into spiders. Subscribe. So with us entering the below ground areas, the game's real problems begin to start in earnest. A problem that it mostly shares with Stone Prophet. The story is just kind of over now. It's been put on the back burner, and it's not coming back until the last 10% of the game. In Stone Prophet, we had this really neat story that was well into the territory of horror for the first few hours. And then we were given a prophecy that served as a checklist to follow for the next 10 hours, and the story and the horror both kinda stopped. There's a similar thing going on in Menzo. We had a small story on the surface. I mean, it was nothing special, but it was fine. Then we get into the Underdark, and we will basically just be making our way through like 10 consecutive dungeons on our way to the underground city, where the story will finally resume. And this isn't a modern complaint, by the way. I'm not a modern player injecting my need for more story onto an old dungeon crawler in some form of anachronism. The OG reviews from launch all complained about the same thing. The game was basically nothing but combat and walking through a series of mazes for the overwhelming majority of the playtime. And I remind you, this ain't even the fun combat. This is the dry, unchallenging version, not the interesting know your enemy combat from Strahd's Possession. The dungeon crawling it's fine, but it's also kind of dumbed down compared to the others. These dungeons are mainly just empty places filled with monsters. There's very few traps, very few puzzles. It's really just combat, and occasionally you have to fly or jump onto ledges. We meet a dwarf up here in the opening levels that summarizes my life for the next 10 or so hours of gameplay.
The way is always down.
We descend through countless layers of tunnels and rock, unaware as I was that Menzoberranzan wasn't just around the corner. I started to notice that my bags were getting real full, real fast, and it was getting to be a bit of a problem. I was hoping that any minute now I could get myself into some kinda home base where I can drop all my junk off kinda situation, but there were numerous times when the way would just close behind you and shut you off from all the places you just were. It made me a little bit nervous to leave anything behind. It was encouraging all my worst habits. Yeah, sure, I already found the door that this key opened, but leave the key behind? Are you out of your damn mind? What if I need it? Listen, when I finished this game, I still had a goddamned bucket of water from town at the start of the game. What if I needed it? So, with neither a home base, nor willing to stop being a pack rat, I just had to keep going and accept that my inventory was going to be hell this game. I tried to find other ways to console myself and to enjoy the rare, cool moment this game has to offer. Like, look, here's one. Let me get my screenshot folder ready, actually, because I feel like we just found another thumbnail. Ah! After making our way through raw tunnels and dwarven mining operations, we soon reach a proper dwarven temple that at least contains some scraps of story. We get a prophecy that we need to use a decipher language spell in order to use, as well as some intrigue we can spot through the walls, hinting at a war between the houses of Menzoberranzan. I do want to point out, though, that this temple map is gorgeous. Or at least it is through the power of contrast. If you watched my Stone Prophet video, you may remember that I complained that literally every single dungeon was some flavor of beautiful tomb or temple. And because of that, they all ended up blending together, and none of them had the punch that they should have. Menzoberranzan, like the first Strahd game, does not have this same problem. This game is unafraid to just make some maps be ugly, and that is actually great. Not only does it help immersion, because, I mean, not every cave is beautiful, but it's also so important to get you primed to marvel at the nicer looking areas of the world. I wish more games weren't afraid to just let certain segments be ugly. But as I'm nearing the end of the temple, prophecies and puzzles still unsolved, the greatest challenge gets thrown my way. Deadlines and a 2-week vacation force me away from my playtest for an entire month. And when I get back, I have no goddamn clue what's going on.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
So I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just a guy wandering around, prying jewels off the walls and trying not to have a panic attack with my inventory situation. It's a mess, but eventually I muddle through and I make my way out of the temple. And then Drizzt gets stolen away from me. Drizzt, who has been my frontline fighter, who has eaten up 25% of the total XP I've gotten all game. He's gone. He's gone! And I'm gonna have to find a replacement, because he was carrying so much stuff, and I can't carry all this with only 3 people. But they're gonna be low level, because Drizzt ate all their XP! Drizzt, come back, please, I'm sorry. You can be the center of attention. I'm sorry, I was wrong. Come back, Drizzt! I take a deep breath, and I accept that I've gotten myself into a kind of I'm completely fucked situation. I backtrack, and I find a teenage elf fighter lady. She is low level, but with my party's buff routine, I think it should be okay. I really only need her to carry crap around and not die in melee, and thankfully, she does do that job just fine. Our damage output honestly shall never recover from the loss of Drizzt, but at least the run is salvaged. Only, I did make a little mistake here, because when I grabbed the elf, I left all of Drizzt's gear back where I lost him. And I forgot that the replacement's gonna need one of these radiation gems in order to survive. Plot hole though, how is she just standing here perfectly fine and not dying of Underdark radiation until the moment I recruited her? And why am I even bothering to save the prisoners from Menzoberranzan? They're humans! Their skin will be peeled from their bones by the time I get there. Further down, we find a mushroom kingdom, and we help them squash an Umber Goomba. As we pass through ever more caverns, I fully get into the groove of the sound work. Although it's not quite on par with some of the more nightmarish SFX of Stone Prophet, Menzoberranzan is clearly where the sound team really started pushing the quality of enemy noises. They're very clean, very recognizable, and overall just very high quality. Albeit, some of them do sound a little bit more like old school Pokemon cries than like realistic sounds. It never quite hits the level of the grave golems from Stone Prophet, but still, the game sounds excellent, and we got another great showing from the music team too. Likewise, while characters are few and far between, the voice work is much more professional, and it might even be on par with the excellent acting we got from Stone Prophet.
It is now you must attack.
Yes, I shall lead the attack. But ho, what more will my Darrow be than a diversion?
All in all, the sound team and the art team really deserve some high praise for their work on this game. Next up, we find ourselves in the Cavern of the Driders, signaling that we are just outside of the city. So for the non-D&D fans in the audience who are watching, Driders, that's what you call a drow spider. See, drow is just one of those words that you're allowed to portmanteau, and it just gets played straight every time. It's very Druid's Rock, isn't it? Anyway, Driders are essentially just drow who have been cursed for failing Lolth the Spider Goddess, and one of those Driders is asking for help to return to elf form. And he's... actually, one second. Crow.
Mm-hmm.
If a spider isn't wearing a shirt, is that hot? Would you click on a thumbnail with a shirtless spider?
I would click it out of genuine, like, horror and curiosity.
Okay, fantastic. That's all I needed to know. Anyway, we agree to help him end his curse, and he gives us some contacts in Menzoberranzan. And in return, he gives us a scroll that will allow us to return to Spida and cross a great webbed chasm. I feel strangely like the devs have never seen a spider before, though. The last obstacle is a skeletal ferryman who extracts payment from us to ride his boat into the city. And you know what? I'm in a good mood. Every creature in this whole cavern, you get a free swing. I can take it. And here we are, where the story actually resumes. Menzoberranzan. I just hope my health insurance covers it. It's a bit strange that a bunch of surface people are here, but the denizens have bigger crap to worry about, as a war is currently brewing between 3 of the great houses. The streets are empty of all but the bravest of drow, as everyone is just waiting for the conflict to pass. I make my way to the market, and I finally drop all the crap I've been carrying into a tent. I also find a merchant who nonchalantly tells me that he'll trade me a music box in exchange for Chekhov's helmet. I tell him no thanks, because I probably need to shoot it in Act 3 or something. Then I go find a sorceress by the name of Sar Terrell, the contact of my Drider friend. He was her lover, apparently, but in a sense where he was more like Sar's trophy. And both parties would actually like that situation back, please and thanks. The curse was given by a priestess of House House Bainry, one of the three that is preparing for a great war between the houses. The curse is tied to the throne of House Bainry, so if we want to break the curse, we're gonna have to go there. Breaking into a great house, though, not as easy as it sounds. Strahd informs us that we'll have to go speak with a wizard in the Tower of Sorcier. And it's a bit weird in terms of narrative, because all the buildings in Menzoberranzan are filled with hostile bugs. You could argue that they're like pets or something, but I'll loop back to this point later to show why this explanation doesn't really work. We find the spider mage at the top of the tower, and he tells us that he will help in exchange for the music box we offered in the market. Ugh, fine. Sorry, Chekhov, the gun shall remain unfired. I make the trade and I give the box to the wizard. He sends us, concealed, into House Bainry to break the curse that is tied to the throne. And it goes very well. The Drider is re-drowified. But we also find ourselves in a sticky situation, as the matron of House Bainry is right there with her pet mind flayer. Remember the innkeeper who gave us the helmet? Apparently we were being used as unwitting delivery boys. They tell us to go get the helmet back, or we shall be eaten just like the innkeeper. Apparently this helm is actually the Helm of Spiders, and is the sacred artifact that the houses were gearing up to fight over. We never hear from House Bainry again, so even though they have just threatened our lives, we don't actually need to worry about it. I feel like the devs may have just forgotten that House Bainry was gonna kill us. The helmet appears to have been stolen from the innkeeper by House Do'Urden, and so we need to get in there. Both to get the helmet, but also to rescue the villagers. Unable to find an entrance to Drizzt Do'Urden's family estate, we return to Sartarel, who now owes us a favor. She puts us in contact with a wizard from the third warring house, the House of Febronk. Using magic, he transforms us indefinitely into drow so that we can blend in. He also informs us to a treacherous Do'Urden, who provides information on how to enter the estate. The only thing we're still missing is a set of Do'Urden insignia. As we're looking, Sartarel is kind enough to open up a portal to the wizard we met at the beginning of the game. We ask him some questions about the Gem of Lolth that supposedly fits into Chekhov's helm, and he's like, "Bro, the Gem of Lolth? Bro, that was one of the gems you brought me earlier. Here you go." And then he just fucking gives it to us through the portal, which is, I mean, I'm not going to complain, it's very convenient. Anyway, a D&D 5e character is willing to help us track a Do'Urden patrol into the Mantle Caverns, and soon we have our insignias. We infiltrate House Do'Urden, and now I will explain why it's so weird that the city's buildings are full of monsters. House Do'Urden is made up of like a dozen drow across the whole estate, and then hundreds of rampaging bugbears and scorpions that attack on sight. Why are they here? Do'Urden, you don't have time to take over the city. You're under attack right now. Your entire estate is under hostile occupation. Look, we're not even illusory drow under this spell, so the nasties haven't sniffed us out as fakes. We are drow. We've transformed into them. We even get their racial abilities and everything. If these guys are attacking us when we are literally card-carrying Do'Urden drow, then that means they're attacking everybody all over the place. This really just feels like a poor and non-immersive choice. I feel like if they wanted this to be a dungeon where people were like attacking us, they probably should have set it up so that one of the other houses was attacking House Do'Urden, and that would give us enemies to fight. But as is, I don't know. I just wish they'd spent more time making the city of Menzoberranzan feel like a living, breathing place, and less time was spent designing 10 levels of random caverns before we reached the city. We find the Helm of Spiders once more, but that drow traitor who helped us get in here was lying in wait to ambush us. The scheme, as it were, was to kill us and get rewarded for his diligence. He wasn't a true traitor after all. But he dies like the rest, and now we have both the helmet and a key to help us enter the ritual chamber. Matron Malice has Drizzt on a table, preparing to sacrifice him to Lolth to redeem their house. The final battle, well, it's not very good, to be honest. It's not a boss fight so much as it is a million creatures everywhere. It's certainly the hardest fight in the game, but that doesn't say very much. We are attacked by a strange and otherworldly monster, though. I encountered one of these in House Febronk, but I was actually unable to hurt it, and I had to run away. But this time, I have a fully assembled Chekhov's helmet, and we are in Act 3. With Matron Malice and her creature dead, Drizzt wakes up from his trance. We flee as quickly as our legs can carry us, freeing the villagers and taking one of the easier paths back to the surface. Drizzt and the villagers thank us for our help, and you know, it's nice. Honestly, maybe the real sexy clickable thumbnail is the friends we made along the way. No, that's dumb. The real sexy thumbnail is probably that centaur from the beginning. Have you seen his abs, dude? And that is the story of this game. It's worth talking a little bit about how the game was so emblematic of its time when it was released, and also why it led to the end of the SSI exclusive era for D&D games. It's tempting to say that SSI was incapable of creativity, or that they were producing shovelware. They did, after all, create like 50 plus D&D games over the 6 years they had the license, which is fucking wild. Oh, but thanks, by the way, I will never run out of content, SSI, I love you. But it's not really fair to criticize them in quite so harsh of terms, because SSI did do a lot of innovation, both in-house and also in companies they worked with, like Westwood Gaming, that they took under their wing. Like, are you gonna tell me the SSI era was creatively bankrupt when they were making dragon jousting simulators? No, SSI was actually very good at innovating. They could create great new formulas that people loved. The original Gold Box games that launched in '88 were a hugely popular and beloved step forward for CRPGs. But see, SSI had a real problem, and that problem is what led to their downfall. SSI was good at innovation, but they didn't want to do it very often. They built the Gold Box engine on a wave of innovation, and then they went, good, we don't have to innovate anymore. And they promptly shoveled out something like 14 Gold Box games in around 3.5 years. In a blindingly short time, the Gold Box had gone from everybody's favorite engine to something that everyone was rejoicing the death of. And they just kept on trying to dev games in this exact same way. They'd do a huge innovation, create a new engine and a great formula, and then they would just shovel out junk based off of that new formula they'd just invented. Strahd's Possession was a good game that people liked, even if it wasn't wildly successful in a commercial sense. It was a well-crafted dungeon crawler with a solid engine for its time. Menzoberranzan, however, is the follow-up shovelware they spat out based on the Strahd formula. It's not horrendous, the formula is good after all, but still, at best, it's a solid 6 out of 10. The creativity went into Strahd's Possession, not this game. And with Menzoberranzan, it was clear for all to see that SSI had not learned a damn thing. They can't just innovate once and then iterate with shovelware. And so, with TSR becoming increasingly dissatisfied, they lost the license. Or at the very least, they lost the exclusive license, because they did still put out a few D&D games after this. Honestly, I think that punch in the nose and the loss of exclusivity is what led to a huge spike in quality with Stone Prophet. SSI couldn't rest on their laurels anymore, and were forced to stop making trash D&D games. And it's a shame, because this was a good engine, and the seeds of greatness were in Menzoberranzan. It just didn't get the creativity and the love it needed to thrive. I wish we got a better version of this game, set entirely within the city of Menzoberranzan. But in the end, that's just not the game we got. And with Wizards of the Coast becoming incredibly stingy with the D&D license these days, I highly doubt we're going to see that anytime soon. I have an announcement. It is finally time to kick open the doors and host another community event. Starting on the 1st of June and extending for the entire month, we will be playing Neverwinter Online, that other D&D MMO. I've invited a number of other content creators and their communities to join, and I promise a bangin' good time with plenty of community events. Previously, we played DDO last October, and I had a blast playing it with all of you guys. So if you want a chance to join the community for an event, and also probably to hang out with a slightly inebriated William SRD in voice chats, then I hope to see you there. Down in the description box below, you're going to find a link to my event server Discord, where you can find the rest of the details you need to know.